Good afternoon, friends. Steven Ben-nun with Israeli News Live, and this afternoon we have a very wonderful special guest here, Craig Laforest. I recently learned about Craig. He is a victim of well, I'm going to let him tell you what the victim part of it is. To me, it's just so complex. I heard an interview with him with the late Dr. Robert Duncan, and it just blew my mind away to see the mind control, the victims of mind control, and what these this amazing people go through on a daily basis. But he has been so kind to do an interview with us here, and so without any further ado, I want to introduce you to Craig Laforest. And Craig, if you can just share first before we get into the questions here, we have close to a dozen questions we're going to be asking him tonight, and I'm going to shut up so that I can let him just really explain as much as we can. And because oddly enough, you guys may not realize this, but this man is bombarded even while we're trying to do this interview. Craig, please share with us everything about yourself and and of course, the group that you're a part of, the organization you're a part of, and trying to bring awareness to this mass suffering that people are going through.
Thanks, Steve. Great to be here from Sydney, Australia. It's Tuesday at about 10:30 a.m. Local time, so I know it's still Monday in Texas. And thank you for offering me the opportunity to come along and speak and to your audience. I usually when I start my presentations, I give a little bit of background as to who I am. I'm 72 years old. I was born in Sydney, Australia, English mother, Australian father. They met during World War II. One of four boys. I studied in England for a year when I was very young. Mum took the four boys from Sydney to England by ship and back again to Australia in 1960. I had such a passion after this experience to travel on ships and the ocean and see the creation, how beautiful the earth was. I studied and received a Bachelor of Commerce in accounting, and was an accountant for several years. However, the passion of the ocean and nature and ships really wanted me to be more involved in contacting people, being in operations, marketing as best as I could. So I was offered a position in Los Angeles in 1983 as general manager of an outbound incentive company. I had worked in Tahiti for several years and then started my own business in French Polynesia handling ships. I was also a director with a luxury cruise line based in Los Angeles. And in 2011, after 28 years in Los Angeles, I returned to retire in Sydney. I've taken care of foster children, respite children, and work at home with non-profit organisations, and have held concerts in my home for the Cancer Council and the Wayside Chapel, which is a homeless organisation here in Sydney, Steve.
Excellent. And Craig, one thing I wanted to ask you is, when did you first realize that mind control technologies were being used on you?
I'm one of the victims of what's called V2K technology, voice to skull technology, and electronic microwave transmissions or directed energy pulses, torture, and have been a targeted individual or TI for approximately 35 years. Dr. John Hall wrote A New Breed, Terrorism in America and Guinea Pigs, and he said a targeted individual is a person who has been targeted by the government to be experimented on with what we call neuro weapons or electromagnetic weapons, weapons which are designed to interact with the human nervous system. And so that's what happens to me every single day through the transmissions. You know, we're being targeted by the developers of this technology and the idiots who serve them, their minions. Victims of V2K, which is most of the victims have very clear voices coming into their heads, or electromagnetic or microwave radiation on their bodies, from which we are literally burned. So I have scars on my body from these transmissions. I am engaged to speak about these technologies on panels and radio around the world, and victims of these atrocious experiments have been experimented on for so long illegally with brain implants, brain chips, and by brain scanning. So unscrupulous, what we refer to these ear, nose, and throat specialists as unscrupulous, and dentists are implanting people without their permission while they're in surgery under general anesthetic. Non-consensual brain implants and chips are extremely difficult to find via MRIs, X-rays, and CAT scans, as they are very small and they're not all made from metal. And what happens in the skull is, if there's a chip or an implant, calcification happens and bone grows over the chip or implant, and it's very hard to find them. So neurosurgeons see these on a scan of the brain, and they're called LFOs, light foreign objects, but they would never go in there to try and find out what this is, because it's too invasive, and there's a chance that it could create some more damage for the victim. So I also have transmission through the eyes, which all TIs have. It's part of the technology. And they consider this, the people who are using these technologies on us, consider this a privilege of their technology. So via my brain implants, I am tortured every single day with burns on my body at night. I feel the waves of energy wherever I am. I can be on a ship up in the North Cape or down in the Antarctica, and I can be literally kicked off my feet or burnt. And I believe I was implanted during the time I was in Los Angeles.
Wow. So there's no place that you can get away from this at all.
Nowhere at all. I can be on a plane, and I just did recently a trip from Sydney to Johannesburg to join a cruise up to Civitavecchia, the port for Rome, and I was just bombarded all the way in the plane, and it's so overwhelming. The pain in the head is so overwhelming from this that you end up with tears rolling down your eyes. You can't stop the pain coming.
Craig, how do they cast the people that they use for this particular experiment of theirs?
We estimate through our organisations that 60% to 65% of the victims are ladies, 40% are men, and we usually find that they're highly intelligent and are isolated. They are single. A lot of single ladies. Which is absolutely abhorrent when you consider that men in the CIA or DARPA are using these people every single day. I receive very strong pressure points, and I can literally feel the pulse of the voice as I hold my fingers to my head. So I can, as you were saying earlier on, I'm hearing the voices very clearly in my head, and I can put my fingers up and feel the pulse of the voices.
That is just crazy. Another question I would like to ask you about as well. Who are the people you've been involved with in your life, and who are associated with this type of science?
I lived, as I mentioned, from 1983 to 2011 in Los Angeles. And it was in the last couple of years when I was making a decision to come back to Australia between 2009 and 2011. I lived in Malibu, LA, for part of the time with the scientist James Cameron, director of Avatar and Terminator. I visited iLabs, which is the Institute for Learning and Brain Sciences in Seattle with Jim, where we saw the experiment. A child was used to project thoughts onto a screen. The child should have been protected from any form of experimentation. There was no reaction from the people in the room. And I had many strange relationships with Cameron, situations while living with him. I'd always heard voices in my head. And after iLabs, and I believe Cameron's involvement with, he's a brilliant scientist, and he's always trying to understand more about the brain. I believe it was because of my association, not the easiest guy to get on with in the world. In fact, one of the most, arrogant people I've ever met. So as soon as I realized that I was hearing these voices very clearly, I tried to contact him. And it was towards the end of my stay in Los Angeles that there was no response from Jim at all. And I lived with Jim for 4 or 5 months in the compound in Los Angeles, and went through a series of situations with the family there, which was I found very unusual. So yeah, between 2011 when I came back, it was really intensified. I literally walked into my home, and the voices said, "Don't think that just because you've left Los Angeles, we're going to stop playing with you. That this is a game that they play with millions of innocent people around the world." Through my research also in those early days, I was introduced via radio and conferences with the ex-CIA scientist, Dr. Robert Duncan, and Robert became a very, very close friend. There was a wonderful discussion I had with Robert when he came down to Sydney. It's only an hour and 14 minutes, and I'm sure that your guests would enjoy listening to that. But Robert opened up about the technology, how it was created by the CIA, and how it was used on American citizens around the world. And when Robert realized that American citizens were being used, he became a whistleblower for 22 years.
Yes, when I watched that video myself, Craig, I was floored, and that's what caused me to reach out to you. I found it through oh gosh, I guess I forget where I ran across the video out to start with, but it just really floored me. And so yes, in the description below, when you watch this interview, you will be able to listen to that interview with Craig Laforest and Dr. Robert Duncan. It's really amazing. Many people, Craig, tell their doctors they are hearing very clear voices. And what have you found the response to be typically from the doctor that is hearing this from a patient maybe for the first time?
It's stunning. It's stunning. I remember hearing this quite often, and I went to a GP, as many of the victims do, and I was literally told that the Earth. That's like comparing the Earth is flat and there are Martians, flying in from Mars frequently, and we're passed off as being delusional or schizophrenic, but schizophrenia happens to people in their teens, not in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and beyond, and who live incredibly good lives. It just doesn't happen to them. When one considers that the United States, where I lived for 28 years, has a history of experimenting on its own civilians, it just doesn't surprise me that this technology has been further developed after the time that Robert was involved. You just got to type into Google, and I think it's called unethical experimentation of US citizens or on its own citizens. And there's a plethora of information there about what the CIA has done, DARPA has done, to your own citizens. In 2010, it was determined that the US government also intentionally infected prisoners in Guatemala with syphilis, disabled people in Connecticut, New York hospitals with cancer cells, according to a review of medical journal posts. Wikipedia shows a whole history of experiments by the US government, including LSD experimentation, syphilis experimentation, and where 50,000 women and men were forced to have sterilization by the Supreme Court. Cold War radiation victims were injected illegally, non-consensually, with plutonium. Children were fed radiated cereal. Members of your own military were included in the experimentation. I know your audience will also be interested in, there's a October 95 YouTube presentation by President Clinton. US citizens were going into hospital just for basic surgery under general anesthetic and coming out with burns on their body. And in this presentation by President Clinton, he said we had an 18-month investigation into this to find out what was going on. And indeed, we were experimenting with people non-consensually. Associated Press has, I reviewed 4 decades of medical journals and found more than 40 studies that by modern standards would have been deemed unethical. There have been dozens of similar experiments in the United States in which doctors made healthy people sick in the hope of finding life-saving treatments. In the case of syphilis, they waited until people became sicker, and even though they had the medication to help them, they didn't do anything about it. Nothing. I rarely respond to the perpetrators in my head. When I'm engaged to speak about this in conferences or around the world, I stress to the victims and people who are researching this, who feel that they may be one of the victims also. We have millions around the world, millions of people now. Just to not respond. You can Google the grey rock method, and you do not respond to these narcissists who are using you non-consensually. So I never respond to these people, and it's very difficult not to, because I don't have an understanding of this type of evil. I call them cats, C-A-T-S. They are cowards, they're actors, and they're traitors. Traitors to themselves and traitors to their country. And one day the cat will run out of its 9 lives. Look, as I mentioned, the transmission through the eyes, they see what I can see. And that happens to most victims of this technology. I can be sitting watching Jeopardy at night time, and what happens is a certain question will come up in a subject that I have no idea what the subject matter is about. Football, for example. I don't follow football, but I'm given the answer to the question prior to some of the contestants that are there. Look, the wonderful thing is that most victims do have, and some don't. I've got a great group of people who care about me, love me, have done the research, and it's those people who then share the information around the world. When we consider what a privileged life is, we have perpetrators, people who have no soul, who are not only the usual dictators that we hear about now around the world, but the ones behind technology and the experiments. I'm trying to give as much history about this technology as I can. Adolf Hitler accommodated his people by raping the land he believed belonged to Germany. Another form of this Nazi system, this technology, came over from the Nazis initially, is the raping of our bodies, where men and women are raped. And I'll let your audience understand that through the waves of transmissions that we get. World War III is here. World War II never finished. It continued. We didn't win the war in Europe and Asia. The US government invited 800 Nazi scientists to come over post-World War II, and they were experimenting with Dr. Joseph Mengele in the concentration camps. They were given new identities, and they were literally taken away from what should have happened to them to go to the Nuremberg trials and hanged, as did a lot of the top Nazi people. And this was part of what was called Operation Paperclip. So I ask your audience to please just Google unethical experimentation of US citizens, and you'll see all the details there about what's gone on. I'm a spiritual man, and I just know, as I know many of your audience will know also, that the wrath of God will come down on these people. You can't do this to people. When you consider that 21,000 children die unnecessarily every single day, that's from lack of food or water. This is a cry in another direction entirely. How can you not support the people who are here on this planet at the moment? It's ridiculous. Thanks, Steve.
No doubt, and it's just the most mind-boggling events that I've ever seen or heard of in my life. Craig, I'd like to ask you, what is your knowledge on how these implants are inserted into someone's head? Or actually, before I even get into that, let me ask you this: why have you studied this process in the first place, Craig?
Steve, I had to, because millions of us are already non-consensually implanted in our brains, or our brains have been scanned. Beginning in, I believe, 1909 or 1910, and continuing for 70 years, California led the country in the number of sterilization procedures performed on men and women, often without their full consent and knowledge. And as I mentioned, approximately 20,000 sterilizations took place in state institutions, comprising 1/3 of the total number performed in the 32 states where such action was legal. It's amazing to consider that. Eugenics was a commonly accepted means of protecting society from the offspring, and therefore equally suspect of those individuals who were deemed inferior or dangerous or poor, the disabled, the mentally ill, the criminals, and people of color. More recently, California prisons are said to have authorized nearly 150 female inmates between 2006 and 2010. California is not the only state to have these disgusting procedures. There are sites you can go to, just Google them, each state's eugenics program. You can find more information on a state-by-state basis, the number of victims, where these institutions were experimenting with these people. So while this eugenics program in California was partly driven also because of the Asian population and the anti-Mexican prejudice in the United States, southern states were also employed as a means of controlling the African American population. Mississippi, I think it was called Mississippi appendectomies, was another name for unnecessary hysterectomies. Black women were injected to ensure that they didn't have children. It's so dreadful, so dreadful. So when you look at that history, you can understand now why this technology is so rampant and why there are so many victims around the world.
Yeah, and before I go to the next question, one thing that it reminded me of when you talk about these experimentations, Craig, is in Israel, Barry Chamish really brought out the ringworm children and how Israel was doing the experimentations specifically only on Sephardic Jewish children or more of the Arabic population that were Jewish people from Yemen, places like that. And he really exposed how they did that, doing massive amounts of radiation. It was just a really horrible thing there. Um, Going on into our seventh question, what is your knowledge on how these implants are inserted into someone's head?
The research that we have found and the patents that we have found is that these chips implants can be literally injected into in areas of the brain known as nanoparticles. A similar method is now used on patients who have cancer. You inject the cancer cells and heat up that cell, and our brains have very similarly been used in that way. So what happens through the transmission is these implants or chips are heated up in the brain. That's why we have so much pressure and so much pain in our brains. But there's some wonderful causes that you can use, as I just mentioned, with cancer cells. You can inject the cell, you can find the cell very easily and inject it and heat it up and kill the cancer cell. This could be a wonderful technology, for example, for a child who is chipped in the hand or somewhere, that if they're kidnapped or lost, you can find them via satellite. I know Sweden is doing that at the moment. They also put chips in people's hands to use for their Visa card. People who are suffering from Parkinson's disease, there are wonderful experiments that have happened. We are the guinea pigs for this, unfortunately, and continue to be the guinea pigs. But there are wonderful cases where they can put very slim wires into the brain of the patient. And if the patient has lost hand mobility or speech, they can literally, through their thoughts, tap out an email and press the send button, and the email has gone. That's just absolutely fantastic. There's a gentleman by the name of Hugh Emanuel, and he's written about the cochlear implant, and it has two pieces which go up through the nose and the mouth into the sinuses, and the other into the cochlea. So there's a patent for that as well.
Deborah Tavares, brilliant lady. She's about your age as well.
Yep.
and she does a lot of research on the different patents. She'll bring out the patents on the technology that they use to put implants in people and track people. She's done that for quite some time. Um, do you want to go to the
Well,
next question, Craig, or do you want to still
no, I'll
continue
just
on with
finish.
question number
No,
7?
I'll finish that off, mate. One of the patents confirms that an RFID tag can be injected at the back of the throat and wires put directly into the medulla oblongata, located in the hindbrain and the anterior to the cerebellum. The medulla is a cone-shaped neuronal mass responsible for multiple involuntary functions ranging from vomiting to sneezing. It also contains the cardiac, respiratory, and vasomotor centers and deals with the autonomic functions of breathing, heart rate, and blood pressure. And I'm affected by that daily, unfortunately.
That is just horrible to hear that. Um, Craig, you have talked about a World War III today and have talked about this before on other programs, and that is because of greed of knowledge, ego, and wealth. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I respect that many people don't understand this technology. I really do. It's very difficult to appreciate what has happened if you're not involved with the technology. Um, However, we have a world which is so advanced with technology now, so we have to incorporate it into our day-to-day thinking. In the past 100 years only, we've been able to build cars, aircraft, and so forth. We can theoretically go to the moon. There was a lot of question about what happened with that journey in the 60s. You know, we relied on what came out of World War II from the Nazis to develop rockets. They brought over, I think, about 900, 1,000 of the rocket scientists instead of sending them to the Nuremberg trials. So we relied on others with greed of knowledge, and that knowledge has been served against us. So families are now broken because of that technology. I have one member of my family who supports me. You know, so many people are suffering after telling their families that they're hearing voices, and the family members just don't want to hear about it. They literally they are dissed and discarded by their family members. As I mentioned, I was a really good friend of Robert Duncan. He was one of the developers of this technology, and he stepped away because he was a good man. He stepped away from it because he saw what was happening in the world. And when he said, as I mentioned earlier, that he saw it being used on his own people, he was just frustrated. And because of ego and wealth, these people have just taken his research and his work and expanded it so dramatically around the world. He stated, and I've got a piece of paper here. I just want to read it precisely. So Robert stated, "This is a global phenomenon. There is nowhere on Earth you can escape. The full spectrum of electromagnetic energy and physics are combined in this. From the ground, wavelengths travel through the ionosphere, bounce off of it, and the Earth ground. We are bathed in a natural magnetic field of Earth. With those two things, you have a nuclear magnetic resonance machine. Surveillance is available when integrating with satellites." Stephen, this technology should have been used to help people with brain problems. However, it's out of control because wars have proven that once a country is strong, another country has to become stronger and wiser, and that is to many people the priority, and that is ridiculous. This is why we are, 100 years after the First World War, we're still going through this process of trying to prove that we are right and you're wrong, and we don't communicate anymore. And mental illness has been created in healthy people. It's menocide and genocide. Cybernetic warfare, where people and computers are used together to use against other people. It's crazy. They're crazy.
Yeah, I saw that in the documentary that you'd sent to me as well, how that there are definitely good applications that could have been used on this, but it has certainly been used for the opposite, and that's what's probably the saddest thing to begin with. communication too, Craig, has changed dramatically over the years, hasn't it?
Yeah, dramatically. In July, I believe it was in 1976 in Moscow, microwaves were used on employees in the consul in Moscow. And a lot of people ended up with cancer. Now we have the Havana syndrome that some of your audience may have heard about, which was hitting some of the senators and some of your overseas government officials. And it's also called now anomalous health incidents. Look, the human brain has resonance, and the design of this technology weapon can alter the emotional states of entire populations. Using sleep deprivation, you can literally isolate people and change their thoughts very, very clearly. Thank God, I'm able to associate between my own God-given thoughts and those which are being sent into me through the transmission subliminally. The voice of God, as Robert talks about in our presentation, that the video you mentioned earlier on, Robert talks about the LRAD, where the US forces spoke through a microphone, and the retreating Iraqi forces were told in Arabic to lay down your weapons, and they did. And they said, "This is the voice of Allah, lay down your weapons." We're just being murdered, Stephen. Targeting is the murder of a human being's life. To think it has taken so long for the Vets Administration to admit and understand exactly how and why our vets are being medicated for anxiety and depression and PTSD. I think it was about 98% of the depressed soldiers fighting in the Iraq war, for the first time in a war, went in to see the doctor, and the doctor would prescribe all those dreadful prescriptions, medications, Zoloft, Seroquel, Xanax, Zaprina, Paxil. And now you have a lot of these innocent people homeless in the streets around the US. I think you've got 3 major cities, including New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Chicago, which have such a high rate of these people who are now homeless. So this is what's happening to V2K victims. Because they have no support, they are losing family members, they don't know where to go, they're losing finances, trying to prove that they're hearing voices very clearly. And it's just disgusting, absolutely disgusting to see this happen around the world. I'm just overwhelmed by the number of V2K Voice to Skull people who contact me, and through our organization, which we'll talk about in a little while, Icator, and through Targeted Justice out of Texas. Just overwhelmed by these people.
And Craig, one thing that two things I'll mention real quick before you follow with our final question there, and that is now President Trump has signed an executive order just a couple of days ago where he is criminalizing being homeless and talking about rounding these people up as if they've not already been through enough as it is. And another thing I thought of too, as you were talking about the technology, and that is, as I'd shared with you yesterday when we spoke, the Arab Spring was used with the voice of God, and skull to brain technology is one and the same for those of you that are listening that may not know that. But that was told to me right from DC that this is exactly what they used to get the guy to set himself on fire and create the Arab Spring. They tried to do it with the Washington Mall, but it failed. But with that being said, Craig, you are a board member of Icator in Brussels in Belgium, and Icator has set a goal to fight electronic torture on all citizens. Can you please give us an update about this? And then also, we'll have any of that information shared in the description below as well for those that would like to support the project that you're a part of.
Great, thanks, Steve. Yeah, Icator is based in Belgium, in Brussels, and I'm a board member of Icator. Icator, ICATOR, stands for the International Coalition Against the Electronic Torture and Robotization of Living Beings. And our website, if you just would like to jot it down, is www.icatr.org. icator.be. icator.be. We're a non-profit organisation so heavily involved with finding the specialists and making them aware of these technologies. And we're creating a special clinic where people can go to be scanned and tested for any brain damage. Most recently, we've been involved in getting our war crime case together in Brussels. Our new tech advisor is asking for Icator to obtain some RF devices, take measurements to submit as current evidence, along with our petition and legislation in order to regulate weapons on Belgian territory. Our president, Melody Richstan, has been invited to speak at the UN in Geneva. So in order for a lawsuit to happen, we've got to go through that full stage, fully filed stage, but we must show all the efforts before we can do that. So a petition requesting that we have 25,000 signatures has also been put together, and we're asking people to sign that before it goes before the Belgian government. So anyone can sign it, and it will help us enormously. This is a situation where we are just trying to protect future generations. This is so out of control. We work with Barry Trower, the physicist who created the technology for MI5 in Britain. And Barry has gone and stated that within 3 generations, and he said this about 10 years ago, 3 generations, which is 60 years, so we've got 50 years to go, 1 out of 8 children will be born healthy because of microwave and what's happening now with the transmissions of microwave through the ionosphere, through satellites, through 5G. And 1 out of 8 children will be born healthy. The other 7 children will be born with some form of cancer, autism, some other handicap. And we're seeing a massive increase in Australia with this already, with 57% increase in autism alone. So we're just fighting for future generations. I've been involved with children all my life, trying to take care of children in hospitals and respite, as I mentioned at the beginning, foster children. But we need to stop these organisations using these weapons on us, on innocent people. We have to stop it for the future generations. It's deliberate and it's precise, and it's so evil. It's so evil. So we want to stop this. We have to stop this. And so, you know, for our children's sake and for their children's sake in the future, we have to continue to share this information as best we can. Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you, Craig Laforest. Craig Laforest, guys, you can look down in the description to be able to reach out to him, support the work that they're doing there. And of course, Craig, our prayers and the people that are listening, their prayers will be with you. You know, you guys listen, I can't even fathom this, to think that this man, even while we're doing this broadcast, is battling this. And when he gets off of here, he'll still be battling it. Last night, he told me 2 hours of sleep was all he got. You know, and this is day in and day out, and it's nonstop. And he is one of thousands of people that suffer in this way. And we got to do all we can to help, be a part, sign the petition, everything we can do to bring awareness and put a stop to this crime against humanity. Craig, thank you so much for taking the time and helping me put this interview together as well. It made it run so much smoother, so I really do appreciate that tremendously.
Thanks, Stephen. And just finally, if I can say to your audience members, if you would like to help us out, please do 2 things. Understand that there are innocent people out there who are hearing these voices. Please give them the time. You've heard my history of what I've gone through. Please give them the time to explain. And also, if you'd like to make a donation to Icator, we would really appreciate it. We're trying to help your families and your future generation of families. We have to stop this evil technology. Thanks so much. Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you, Craig. And thank you guys for listening. Steven Ben-nun with Israeli News Live and Craig Laforest. Thank you, and God bless you, and have a great evening.